Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got spinning around in front of me today is a Hungarian infantryman of the Austro-Hungarian Empire during the Napoleonic conflict. Man, that is a mouthful. Now, the Hungarian infantry made up about a quarter, maybe slightly more, of the Austro-Hungarian infantry available during the conflict. So they're a pretty good choice if you want to put a little bit of color on your table. They're also not all that difficult to paint, and this is another way of doing white uniforms as well. So whether or not you're painting the Hungarian or the German Austrian infantry, maybe there's one or two things in here that you might find useful. So all of the paints for this will be listed in the description below, and I am actually borrowing quite heavily from the painting guide over on Piano Wargames, which I will link to in the description. There's one or two changes to make this a little bit quicker. So let's get started. So this fella here is from Piano Wargames. Now they do beautiful figures. I really like their work. This fella is actually a 3D print, but there's also white metal versions available too from the same website. So don't feel as though you're going to be missing out if you don't have a printer. Now obviously if I'm going to be doing most of him in either white or very light colors, I've primed him here in matte white from the Army Painter. Any white primer will do the job. If you can't get white for some strange reason, then the lighter the better, like off-white, a bone or something like that, but white, go for it. If you've got it, use that. Now as far as painting them goes, we're going to start from areas where we are likely to make a little bit of a mess, or it doesn't matter too much if we do. And for that, we're going to start with his skin. Now I'm just going to straighten out my brush, and I've got here Cadian Fleshtone, and we're going to go straight over his face and hands. I might find it needs a second coat because that's a little bit thin. I might have put a bit too much water in there, but hey ho. Now in the realm of bits that are likely to end up a bit messy if we do them later, what I have is some warped yellow, and I'm going to paint the Austrian knot on the trousers. You see, I don't worry too much about hitting the white stuff because we are going to paint over this with blue in a little bit. As well, don't forget the stripe down the side of his trousers. You'll probably see a couple of little splurges outside the lines there, but that's why we tidy as we go. Now, I'm going to use here a couple of different contrast colors. I have his Gore-Grunta Fur, and I'm going to go over his pack with this. Just try and avoid the white straps if I can. And I'm also going to use Basilicanum Grey on the rolled pack, so the rolled greatcoat rather, across the top of his pack, but I'm going to do those both relatively quickly off screen. Now you don't have to use contrast on those two areas, but because there's so much texture to them, it's kind of the ideal use case for those styles of paints. So whether it's contrast, speed paint, or what have you, it's a good choice there. Now I'm going to spin him around and we're going to turn to his facings, collar, all that sort of stuff, his regimental colors. Now I'm using here Dragon Red because I am painting the 34th Regiment off the top of my head, which was listed as having a madder red facing. So I'm going to probably do some of this off screen because it'll be a little bit easier to navigate. But yeah, you can pretty confidently eyeball some of these colors. It doesn't matter too much if they are perfect or not, because of course between dye manufacturing techniques, fading, all that sort of stuff we usually associate with uniforms of the period, close enough is close enough. Now that is relatively quick to do. If you do struggle a little with getting in behind his neck here, then remember of course that if you approach from this angle, you're going to hit his hat, and we're going to paint that black. It'll be nice and simple. You'll see a little bit of where I have splurged. Now we get to the interesting bit. What I'm going to use here, this is Arctic Gem that I'm prepping up, and we're going to paint in his trousers. Now this is a little bit lighter than would be technically accurate, but because we are going to shade this, it's going to look a little bit more reasonable when we're finished. Now a couple of sources did mention that this would fade to an almost sort of stonewashed denim appearance. So if you're painting Space Wolves or something, you might have a color that works well for that. Now once you've applied the first coat of that, make sure to let it dry thoroughly before applying the second, because you're just going to lift up paint that hasn't properly settled yet, and it will just make more work for you. What I'm going to turn to now is Cygor Brown, and this is another contrast color. which you don't necessarily need to be using, but it is nice and simple. I'm just going to blast over his musket with this, and as well, I'm also going to paint the water bottle that he's carrying with this too. Now we're coming into the home stretch when it comes to tidying up and base coats. What I'm going to use is Black Legion for the black parts, so his boots, his cartridge box, and his shako. And again, this falls under the category of does not have to be contrast. You can use a ordinary black paint here. I just like how this one goes on. I did come back with a second coat on some of the flat areas of the shako just to make sure that it was all together, but it doesn't take long to do. What I'm going to turn to is gunmetal here, and big surprise, I'm going to paint in most of his musket with this, the metal bits anyhow. Easiest if you sort of run your brush just up and down, quick little motions to catch the top of the barrel. Now because the 34th Regiment also had pewter buttons, I'm going to paint the buttons on this fella using this. And then for any brassy details, I'm actually going to use Greedy Gold. Now this will look very, very bright going on, and it's quite intense. But again, we are going to shade this, and we've got a couple of highlights left to do later, so don't worry too much. This looks a bit much going on. Now for the strap holding on his canteen, I'm going to use a little bit of ancient stone and take my time relatively carefully as I go around his neck here. And now I think this is the very last of the base coats, is to grab a little bit of woodland camo, and I'll flip them upside down, make it a bit easier to reach this. I'm going to paint in the oak leaves hanging, projecting, sticking out the top of the little pom-pom there. Once I've done this, I'm going to cruise around with a bit of white, tidy up some of the jacket and what have you. Any bits that I might have missed or now need to tidy up, I'll do that before we get to the shading stage. Once you're satisfied with your tidy up, it's time to go ahead and shade him. And for this, what I'm going to use is a wonderful mix called Marine Juice. This is an old army painting method from the Forge World team, so it works pretty well. What this is 3 parts Reichland Flesh Shade, 3 parts of Dark Tone from the Army Painter, and then 4 parts of, Lamian Medium. Now you might notice that works out, that is essentially a bottle of each. So if you want to make up a big mix of this, you can just grab yourself a large container and then dump 1 bottle each of those shades, and it'll all be perfect together. Now the reason why I'm using this, as you'll see, it's not staining anything. It isn't terribly changing the colors that we're putting it over the top of, but we are getting loads of shading. Now the idea behind the colors that go into it is that it is it's brown without being, it's warm without being red, brownish without being just grimy, and as well, we still get plenty of shading from the dark tone that's in there. Now I've done this in a few different videos, so if there is a different mix that you prefer the look of, knock yourself out. But whichever one you decide to use, going over everything, the medium here is the key to making sure that we're not staining these big flat areas any more than we need to. So once I've got this all over the miniature, I'll just guide it away from any big flat pools I don't want, and then leave them somewhere to dry. Give them about half an hour and see what we get then. And then once that has dried, that's your rear ranks finished. What you could do would be to quite happily just varnish him, chuck this fella at the back, base him up, call it done. But let's take it a little bit further because, of course, why not? So what I'm going to start with is his face and hands again. I'm going to go back to Cadian Fleshtone, and we're going to cover over most of the skin with this again, leaving just a little bit in the recesses of that shaded stuff. So careful around his lips, and his eye sockets and what have you, but most of this, let's go back to that base color. Now with that done, I'm going to switch up to Kislev flesh, and this time we're going to concentrate on more of the raised areas of his face. With these fellas, it's easy to draw a nice quick L shape on the face. Gives you the cheekbones and the front of the face as well. which is kind of my generic advice for highlighting faces anyway. As well, don't forget backs of his fingers. So there you can see how that L shape feeds onto his chin. But what we're going to do now is the final highlight with a little bit of flayed one flesh. And this is a bit tricky to keep on the camera, I'll be honest. But I'm going to do just a little across his chin. We'll do a little bit across his cheekbones as well. We're not going to go down the face. We're going to make these look properly gaunt. We'll also do a little on the tip of his nose. I'm going to lift from the painting guide here and actually grab a little bit of Carroburg Crimson and apply that just on his bottom lip. Won't look like much going on, but just blop it on there and then let it dry. It's really nice for that cool old school toy soldier look. Then for that final touch on the face, load up your brush with just a little bit of Apothecary White. You want to, not very much on there at all, because rather than painting it on, we're going to use it from the pot, but almost like a glaze. You want to guide it onto his chin, lower part of his face, and we'll get a funky kind of stubbly effect there. Now when it comes to his trousers, to be perfectly honest, even the guys in my usual front ranks, I would not go to this stage. But what you can do is thin down that little bit of the Arctic blue we used as the base color, and just pick out some of the areas where you want a slightly tidier look to them. So you can use this to follow the flatter areas, define some of the highlights a little bit more. It's up to you. I think it's not really a necessary step, but if you do want to spend the time, really have those front rank guys look pretty smart, then a little bit of fresh blue will not hurt. Now the white, what you can do is to pick out a few parts on the jacket that you want to brighten up and have them look quite smart, whereas the crossbelts would look better if you cover most of these in pure white again and leave just the shaded stuff towards the joints and recesses. So your jacket looks a little bit grubbier than your crossbelts. Then what I've got here is a little bit of mithril. You could also use plate mail metal, but because we haven't shaded the metallic stuff very much, I prefer a much brighter highlight on the metal. Just a bit of this along the top of the musket and the edge of the bayonet. And now I'm just going to go ahead and grab a smidgen of true brass and paint in, funnily enough, the brassy bits. You could do a smidgen of this on his buttons too if he had brassy buttons, but obviously this fella having pewter, not a worry. Now this step I have deliberately left to last, because this is in the realm of it will look amazing if you do it, but don't worry too much if you don't want to do it, because obviously you don't want to mess up, particularly your front rank guys. But I've got again some Black Legion, and I'm going to just carefully dot down the side of his leg. I might need to be a little bit more adventurous with this. I might do some of this off camera, but if I make a mistake here, what I can do is go back to those base colors. So keep the blue and the yellow near you, just in case. Yeah, I don't like doing that. It makes me so nervous. And ironically, the other side, where you're not going to see it as often, is the one that looks better. Oh well, you can tidy that up with the yellow and the blue if you need to, and it does look better if you do that little bit of extra work. But up to you to decide if you want to make that fuss. So what I'm going to do now is go take him outside, hit him with a matte varnish spray, and go ahead and base him too. And the recipe for that will be in the description. So let's get a look at our Hungarian chap once he is all finished. And so, there at last, our Hungarian, Austro-Hungarian infantryman is complete. Now these guys are a lot of fun to do because they do break up, there's quite a lot of white uniform when it comes to doing an Austrian army. So being able to put these fellas on the table, I think, adds a bit of interest to what can be, not bland, but a bit simple looking army. As well, they're pretty cool to throw into your silver bayonet forces too. So as always, thanks go out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my most gorgeous producers, who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. I mean it every time. I try and say it differently every time as well, just so that it sticks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.